It's very hard to control what information AI is going to pull from a document that you give to it. You can try to rein it in. You can say, oh, if something has such and such date attached to it, then just ignore it. Oh, just look at the latest determination, ignore all the other comments because they've already been resolved. But it is the case that AI does not check its work. It's just generative. It's just going off of probabilities, trying to figure out what comes next based on your input.
I think then you can start building it up more slowly and saying, okay, I have this template. Help me put this information that I've collected into the template and just see what happens. And if it's not right or it's gone, hallucinated everything, that's fine. You've tried, iterate again. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people fall into as well. They expect AI to be perfect straight away. They think it's the golden tool that will solve all of our issues. That's just not the case.
I welcome you to the AI the Docs or API the Docs podcast. It makes more sense to call it AI the Docs at this point. And today, my guests are returning guests from AI the Docs, the conference. Let me welcome Gareth and Lydia from Gravity.
Hi there. Nice to be here.
Hi.
Welcome. And why I said recurring is because, Gareth, you gave a fantastic presentation last June about what a small but mighty team can do to leverage artificial intelligence to work faster, better, have overview over more. And although, Lydia, you were not on the stage, I think you were probably a big part of that presentation. How did you get to being a technical writer and by now a senior technical writer?
There were lots of factors involved. I have always enjoyed writing. I actually won some awards in college for writing, and my English professor was trying to recruit me, but that was a tough sell, so I ended up pursuing physics. That led to a career as an engineer where you have some very complicated setups. I was in hardware engineering, and documentation is absolutely crucial in order to get your configuration working and to test things correctly and interpret the results. And documentation is also incredibly lacking, especially when you have some very esoteric setups that only a few people in the world understand. And most of the knowledge is just native knowledge is the term. It's just in their head. They know what they're doing. It's not written down anywhere. So it was often my job to try to document exactly what was needed and why, basically doing the technical writing for the hardware equipment where there wasn't. That kind of gave me a taste of what it would be like to be a technical writer. And so that led me into technical writing. And I worked for a startup, an Italian-based startup that was heavily focused on composable software, lots of Kubernetes work that was really interesting. And in that same sphere was Gravity and API management platforms. And so luckily, everything worked out. Now I'm really happy where I am, and it's absolutely fascinating work.
And Gareth, a Master of Arts in Technical Communication. Why is that in the arts department?
That's a good question. I'm not actually sure why it's in the arts department. From my perspective, it wasn't really engineering focused. It wasn't for a specific industry. What we learned during that master were writing skills and communication skills and design skills from the e-learning side of the degree that could be applicable to multiple industries. So we weren't tied to, like you would see with engineers, one specific field. The goal of the master's was to give us the skills and knowledge that we were needed, and then we could adapt to any field. So like I could have applied for jobs in many different fields, not just software, aerospace, medical, pharmaceutical. I know people who went into every walk of life from that degree. So I suppose a Master of Arts, maybe that's the reason why it was more focused on the technical communication side of things and how to communicate with others in an effective way rather than tying us to a specific subject matter.
Do you see this in your everyday work, that the two of you would approach something somehow with a different lens for the same outcome?
I think I definitely take the more writing approach to things. I'm like, basically my background, like during my master's, I focused on like plain language and accessibility and how writing, technical communication in general, and design can have an impact on like society and people, and how the smallest elements of choosing colors can really have an effect on how people think about the information presented to them. So I'm always coming at it from that perspective. So whether that's for good or not, I don't know, but that's the way that I like to tackle things. But I think Lydia and I are pretty much aligned, but Lydia might just tell you differently now.
No, I think that despite our very different backgrounds, Gareth and I are very much aligned and take the same approach. You understand the importance of everything Gareth just said, with clear, plain language, visual cues, formatting, how you approach your audience, all of that when you are actually in the position of having to learn something. So being on the other side of it, being someone who is desperately seeking documentation from a vendor where there was none, I could identify those things as being highly important. And so I know that they're first and foremost something that we have to communicate to our users and our audiences.
Yeah, I think I agree with Lydia on that like, often people ask me, Lydia, I'm not sure if they ask you the same, they're like, how did you become a technical writer without a computer science background, since you work in software? And like, I do make sure that I am technically enabled in the product that I am documenting, as I should be. But in many ways, I see that as an absolute benefit. As Lydia said, you can approach it like you would a user and be the lowest common denominator and say, oh, what do you do here? Because often the subject matter experts might just do a step without documenting it because it's second nature to them, whereas it wouldn't be second nature to me. So in many ways, I see that as an asset to myself and to documentation in general in software, that I can ensure that no step is missed in that process.
In your conference presentation, you were telling about how you sat down brainstorming on what are the fields that you could give a good push to really fast and then even automate it, and that you landed on release notes as the first veterinarian horse to test the idea. Can you tell a bit more about this process, and then why release notes were chosen, and then what did you do?
I think for me, one of the reasons that I personally advocated for the use of AI in release notes was due to the many factors involved in generating them. So even if you're working in a large team, you're often embedded in one specific feature team. And I've been in jobs then where you're given the task of generating release notes, which involves communicating with many teams. And it was no different from us. But being the only two writers at that time, we needed some way to capture all the information across all the feature teams. And sometimes that could be hard for us to manage. And trying to centralize that information can sometimes be difficult if you're working in Jira, GitHub, internal wikis. There's many factors at play that might have crucial information for the release notes. And being the only two writers, I advocated for it in a way that we could use AI then to centralize that information and give us a working draft of the documentation. I felt it was just the place to start, because release notes for us were always, as for everyone, it's done at the end when everything has been written. So there's a lot more pressure involved. There's more, they can be very time consuming. And so I felt like our time could be better spent focusing somewhere else. And that's why I wanted AI to get involved, so that we could free up more of our time.
And how did that look like? So how did you start? What were your choices? What were the constraints that you had to work within?
Lydia will be able to attest to this a lot more than I can, but some of the constraints for tooling is pretty much getting technically enabled in the tooling. and how that would work. And I'll let Lydia speak a little more on that, because Lydia did a mountain of work in making sure that both myself and herself were technically enabled to make sure that the release notes with AI worked.
Yes, release notes, as Gareth mentioned, were a really good candidate for trying to experiment with some new AI processes. Because, first of all, it's a very time consuming task. There's a lot of room for efficiency to be introduced into the equation. Like Gareth said, everything has already been written and documented. It's just a matter of summarizing this information cleanly from multiple sources. And so with AI, you have summarization tooling. Like that's one strength of generative AI is with GPTs is just doing some very clean, accurate summarizations. And so we had that as a potential way to approach this. Also looking at different sources. We have Jira, we have documents, we have all kinds of integrations with other software platforms that we needed to pull from. And that's also a perfect candidate for AI because we could leverage the patterns that you would find in scripting with an AI workflow. So originally how this started is I wrote some scripts in Python that would pull from all these different sources and collect all the information. And then as a second step, it was fed into just basically a chatbot like GPT or Claude, something like that, in order to produce the final summaries that we were looking for. And of course, prompt engineering was part of this. But when we figured out what we were doing a little bit, we decided the way to go would be an AI workflow, and we used N8N for that. And they have a concept of nodes where pretty much every step in your process can be represented by a node. So there are nodes for pulling all of this different release notes automation in a very systematic, automated way that relies heavily on patterns that you would find in regular scripting, pulling that into an array where you could basically send that through generative AI in order to summarize everything. And that would give us the kind of flexibility in order to produce something that we are looking for, because that's one way you can really harness the power of AI besides just doing programmatic tasks, is asking it to adapt to whatever nuances you're presenting. And those things are very difficult to script. If I were going to try to script like what kind of tenses you should use in order to write something, what your tone should be, how long you want something to be, what's a character limit, all of those things are incredibly difficult to actually program in any given language. But if you give that to AI in terms of a prompt, it's able to do a lot of that work for you. And so this seems like a really good experiment. It ended up being successful for us to merge programmatic with summarization capabilities all under one roof and one workflow that we could generalize.
How did you know how much to keep observing, whether this is still doing what you think you're doing?
So that's the question, where basically I think what it showed was like how we kept observing was we kept iterating and getting better. Lydia kept improving the tooling, but we never removed the human element from it. Like we didn't blindly trust AI. So when we kept observing it, was at every step we'd add not a roadblock, but a human checkpoint to ensure that everything was going well. At the beginning, for example, we created what we would consider ideal release notes for us, like matching our style, template, and then at the end as well, to make sure that everything was okay, we made sure that it was reviewed by all the subject matter experts and stakeholders necessary to make sure there were no hallucinations, there was no errors in it. So I think that answers your question. Maybe I went off on a tangent, But we observed in that way, from my point of view, Lydia, I'm sure that you observed from the scripting kind of point of view as well to make sure that it was working.
Yes, it's all about consistency, and you really have to have an idea of what you're looking for when you're developing something. So you have that kind of golden standard that you can measure something against. So, like I said, we went through a lot of different iterations trying to figure out how we could actually play with things to get the results we wanted, to get them consistently, which can be a huge problem using generative AI. You really have to play around with something they call the context window, which is just how large of a chunk of text you're looking at that the AI will actually use in order to start generating new results. Something else called the temperature. Basically, that's how, if you want it to really look at, if it's trying to predict the next word, you can say, okay, if something has a higher probability, you absolutely go with that choice. Or you could back off a little bit and say, you can the top 3 candidates. And so you can control how rigidly you're trying to make something consistent in that way. It's a lot of trial and error. We knew what we were looking for, and we were highly familiar with both the content and what we wanted. And so that made it easier for us. It was never a black box. And then it was just a matter of reproducibility and making sure that all of our sources were clean, because that's something else that's extremely important. When you're pulling content from everywhere, you need to make sure that content is correct, accurate, and just exactly what you're looking for, because AI programming, whatever, it's going to do what you tell it to do. So you have to make sure that you're giving it the right instructions and the right content. So this actually helped us to improve our own internal processes by pointing out areas of weakness, maybe in how Jira tickets were documented, things that could be confusing, things that maybe were not correct, that had been sitting somewhere and that AI was using. So in that sense, it's helping us improve how we do things on a much larger level.
Yeah, just to echo what Lydia has said, like even when it came to templating the release notes, we used it as a golden opportunity to improve our release notes as well, just to write out a template, get the wording right, make it more structured, cohesive. So it gave us the opportunity as well to improve our work going forward, that even if it hadn't worked, and thankfully that it did, that we would still have a new standard, a new gold standard to hit with every release notes. Even if the AI didn't work, we still learned something. We still improved our templating. We learned new technical skills. So it was never going to be a wasted effort. Experimenting with AI, I don't feel is ever really a wasted effort.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important thing to note. It's not about just getting to the end result. It's about the process. It's about the journey. It's about what you can learn and the insights that you find along the way, and how you can improve and just innovate based on what you're learning. And I think the way that AI is just rapidly changing the way we work, the way we live, the way we think about things, it's all an opportunity for growth and an opportunity to explore new areas and ideas and kind of step outside of your comfort zone and your usual routines. And so we're fully embracing that. And whatever we can take away from it is going to be a positive.
Yeah, as Lydia said, the innovation that's come out of this experiment has been amazing. And I think people should start experimenting with AI, even in small ways, because as Lydia said, you might stumble across a process improvement for the whole company or for a department, and you might get recognition on a company level or department level, organization level, whatever way it's structured as well. And so then suddenly your sphere of influence expands.
When you were talking about using generative AI for generating the release notes, and then you made a distinction of using that for the generation and then making that into a fully automated process. So what is the difference? What is the extra lift You did a lot of iterations. You figured out how it would work, what you wanted. In the meantime, the source itself necessarily had to be cleaned up, which I believe is easier said than done anywhere, because you need a very steady source to be able to automate things. So how does this look now differently? What does it mean release note generation is fully automated? What does it look like now for you?
We have built a workflow in N8N, which is an AI workflow platform. All of the nodes that we discussed are joined together without the human interruption. So basically, from start to finish, we have something in place that will comb our GitHub repositories for changes to PRs, that will look at the diffs, that will look at descriptions, play off a lot of fields. There's another branch where the nodes will go and look at Jira tickets, that will look at link tickets, parent tickets, epics, all the information it can find. It will look at PRDs. It will go and it will collect all the sources. They will all be joined together and synthesized using yet more nodes that are meant to process information. And the end result is a large field of content that is going into your summarization node. And that is where the prompt engineering comes into play. And we have developed very established working prompts that have been consistently reliable for the kind of output it produces. And so that whole array of information where you just have the raw data coming from your sources goes through that prompt, and you end up with really consistent, reliable release notes. And after enough times of experimenting with changes to the sources, the inputs, and just playing around with it a little bit, we're very confident in what it's outputting. So we wanted to be really careful that we're going to not make anything up. We're not going to have anything inaccurate. And we're familiar enough with the content that we are sure that is the case. And so now we're ready to have this workflow in production. And it's simple enough for us to check because, like Gareth said, everything's already been written. So if we look at the release notes and something's out of place, we'll know immediately. And so in that sense, it's just good to go. We're fine with a fully automated workflow.
What is the next mountain that you're climbing now?
I suppose the next mountain is helping us draft documentation, and I cannot stress the word draft enough. It's basically, we are trying to, because myself, Lydia, and the other technical writer on the team still have a lot of work to get through for every release, and on top of that, our core documentation work. So basically, we're trying to use AI to help us generate what we call first draft or first pass documentation, which basically, in my opinion, does the same as the release notes, which is just synthesizing information, summarizing it for us. And then we've also given the AI our templates that we use ourselves to write documentation. So in an ideal world, it should produce a coherent first pass documentation that we can then use to put into our live documentation, but there's still a lot of human involvement in that. So it still requires engineering input, product input, and our input. So it's not replacing us. It's just giving us a running start at a documentation request. And because then it's already fitting kind of a rough format in a general template, we already know what information belongs where, and we can start then expanding that information and making sure that it matches our style completely and it has all the information that a user might need. That is my personal mountain that I'm trying to fix. There's many more as well. I'm sure Lydia has her own mountains that she is trying to conquer with AI as well.
Oh, it's a whole mountain range. Yeah, we've got a lot. I have a bunch of epics in our Jira board about the kinds of tooling that we're looking to create. Everything from redirect functionality, evaluating relative links within our documentation to see if they're broken, and if they're broken, where they should be redirected to. That's a prime use case for AI. There are just so many. There's so many use cases that we're looking at for how we can improve. And AI just really bridges the gap between, again, something that's just following a pattern and just very like instructive and not really thinking, so to speak, and then actually creating something new. So like Gareth mentioning, like creating content, that's actually really tricky. You might think that it would be, oh, here's all your sources, here's your material, just write something. But you end up running into a lot of hiccups along the way. There can be a lot of room for interpretation, a lot of assumptions that you didn't know you were making. You can have AI go out and search the web for different information. Some of that can be conflicting, some of it can come back wrong. So it really takes, the onus is on you to really figure out how to communicate well with these tools, what you want to get done and how to do it. And there's definitely a lot of room for error. And so it's a big project trying to generate documentation. Like, I think a common misconception is, oh, AI can write. We'll just have all technical writers. All writers can be replaced with AI. And that's really not the case. There's a lot more to it, especially when it's not just something imaginative. It's like there's a right way, there's a wrong way, there's something that's going to produce an error, something that's not. And then the anticipatory aspect of step two. Gareth and I are pretty familiar with what our readers are expecting to see and what kind of questions they're going to have and how we should craft things to address that and to just set up a flow with our other documentation pages, how to guide the user on a user journey that's greater than just one article. That's not something that can be easily communicated to AI. So yeah, that's definitely our Mount Everest at the moment, but there are lots of other little mountains along the way.
Lydia, maybe you have put a note here that I would like to ask you to go into. I don't fully understand, but it's very intriguing. What do you mean when you say that the inconsistency is due to the context window, or that an LLM would be pulling conflicting information, would lead to a sort of prediction that is unchecked, or, well, at the end, we might say it's fabricated, but based on what? How does this come out to play in, this is a fact, but how does this come out to play in your work? And where does it lead to the point, this is becoming a very meandering question. In my experience, this can lead to the point where I realize, okay, it would have been faster if I didn't try to review what was generated, but if I just wrote it based on the facts that were in front of me. This is leading nowhere fast, but certainly not the automations. But the other side is a tremendous amount of review work and a healthy appetite for error margins. So where do you see this coming out, the context window and conflicting info going in?
Just for one example, like we have PRDs where, a new feature will be described, the stages of development, what it can actually do. This is a working document that is always under review, always being edited and modified. It has a lot of information about what will be released in different stages. It's very hard to control what information AI is going to pull from a document that you give to it. You can try to rein it in. You can say, oh, if something has such and such date attached to it, then just ignore it. Oh, just look at the latest determination, ignore all the other comments because they've already been resolved. But it is the case that AI does not check its work. It's just generative. It's just going off of probabilities, trying to figure out what comes next based on your input. So it's not going to figure out if whatever it gave you is right or not. It's making no judgments on that. And so there can be cases where you're feeding a lot of information into AI that is conflicting, and you can't expect AI to just understand the way a human would, what to ignore, what has more importance attached to it, what's of lesser value. It doesn't do any of that, which is where you have to be really precise and creative with some of your prompt engineering. Otherwise, you can arrive at a place where you have a very nice, very well-written summary that within the summary, it says a few different things in a few different places. That's one of the major roadblocks we have to get around.
What would be your advice for someone who is alone? Gareth, you were suggesting keep researching and keep trying out because it will certainly give you a lift, and trying to elevate your work with generative AI will also give you a different insight into your processes and how you can make them better. So this is 2 + 2 is 5. And what other advice comes to mind? What is it that you would advise for someone who asks, where should I start?
I think start simple and build your way up. I think, especially when it comes to AI, like if you go on like LinkedIn, you'll get scared by these people out. Oh, I invented this whole new process using workflow automations and chats and LLMs. And it will seem, oh, if I can't do that, then what's the point in even trying? Whereas I think if you start small, just like we have of, oh, help us summarize all this information so we can create a draft. If you're by yourself, that's already a massive win because you've already sped up your writing. So you've already enhanced yourself in that way. I think then you can start building it up more slowly and saying like, okay, I have this template. Help me put this information that I've collected into the template and just see what happens. And if it's not right or it's gone hallucinated everything, that's fine. You've tried, iterate again. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people fall into as well. They expect AI to be perfect straight away. They think it's the golden tool that will solve all of our issues. That's just not the case. And I think it's just important to remember that like it will always need the human element. So start small, build it up, and you'll quickly see results. And if you're facing a mountain, take it one step at a time. Like you don't need to race to the top. And like we said, you will find places then that the whole organization that you're part of needs to adapt because you've discovered something through the use of AI. So you will be impacting in a really positive way super quickly by just doing really simple things. So that's always been my advice is start small and it will grow to something much larger and you'll be happy with it without having to build an entire LLM chatbot specifically for your organization.
Yeah, I did all of that really well. You just don't be afraid of it. It's very intimidating when you think of all the capabilities, how to use it correctly, how to interpret the results, just trying to understand how these things work. It's incredibly complicated, incredibly daunting. You can scratch the surface and already be so confused, but that shouldn't stop you from trying to participate. So do start simple, just ask questions, see where it takes you, have fun with it. Don't treat it as a chore, treat it as something that, is there to help you, is just your partner in learning about the world, basically. And you might be surprised at where that journey takes you, like how you decide you need to use AI, but definitely don't feel that you need to understand everything about it and how it works and somehow control it, because that's not possible. And that's not how it's meant to be used. So start small, one step at a time, and just be open. Just be open to whatever happens and go ahead and play.
Thank you very much, Lydia Pedersen Gareth Brinn from Gravity. I hope that everyone could learn a lot from what you were suggesting, and they can find you on LinkedIn with further questions or for chatting about some of their ideas, maybe.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Come and chat to me on LinkedIn. I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about technical documentation, AI, everything. So yeah, come find me on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Thank you very much. And also for being the guests at the podcast and for Gravity to being the gracious host of the AI Docs conference. And see you at the next conference.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the API Docs podcast. We thank our colleagues at Pronovix Developer Portals for letting us work on this, and the entire API community for all of the mutual support and sharing of experiences that you give each other. Do you have a topic or guest that you would like us to spotlight? Drop a note at podcast@pronovix.com. If you go to the website api-docs.org, you can find the recaps and recordings of past API Docs conferences, as well as the upcoming program. Until next time, be well.